The mansion's pipes groaned like wounded animals as I twisted the wrench one more time. 3 months since inheriting this Victorian monstrosity from my grandfather, and every faucet seemed determined to remind me that money doesn't fix everything. The kitchen sink had been dripping for weeks, each drop echoing through the empty house like a metronome counting down to something I couldn't name yet. Just like everything else in this place, I muttered, wiping my hands on an old rag. Looks impressive from the outside, falling apart on the inside. That's when I heard Emily's voice drifting down from the living room, soft and intimate in a way that made my stomach clench. She was supposed to be reviewing case files for tomorrow's court appearance, but the tone was all wrong. Too warm, too personal. "I can't wait much longer, baby," she was saying, her voice carrying that breathless quality I hadn't heard directed at me in months. This whole charade is wearing me down. I set the wrench down carefully, my hands suddenly steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. 38 years old, and I was hiding in my own kitchen, eavesdropping on my wife like some paranoid teenager. But something in her voice kept me frozen there, listening. "No, he doesn't suspect anything," Emily continued. "Nathan's too busy playing Lord of the Manor with his grandfather's dusty fortune. He actually thinks I'm proud of him now." The laugh that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. I'd heard that laugh before, usually directed at opposing counsel or incompetent paralegals at her law firm. Never at me. Not until now. "Rich, you know I love you. This inheritance thing just complicated everything. But once we get through the next phase, we can be together properly. Nathan won't know what hit him." Rich. Rich Keller, her boss at Morrison, Keller and Associates. The golden boy managing partner with the perfect smile and the corner office overlooking downtown Haverford's struggling business district. The man who'd been mentoring my wife for the past 6 months, working late nights and weekend strategy sessions that always seemed to require dinner at expensive restaurants. I pressed my back against the kitchen wall, the old wallpaper rough against my shirt. The house felt different suddenly, like the walls were closing in. Every creak of the floorboards above, every whisper of wind through the loose windows seemed amplified, mocking. "I have to go," Emily said, her voice returning to its normal pitch. "He's downstairs fixing something, always fixing something in this mausoleum. I'll see you tomorrow at the office, and we can finalize the timeline." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Timeline for what? I wanted to burst into the room and demand answers, but something held me back. Maybe it was the IT guy in me, trained to gather all the data before making a diagnosis. Or maybe it was simple cowardice, the part of me that would rather live with suspicion than face the truth. Footsteps crossed the living room floor, heading toward the stairs. I grabbed my toolbox and made noise, lots of it, clanking wrenches and muttering about water pressure. By the time Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway, I was the picture of domestic competence, just a man wrestling with his inheritance's plumbing problems. "Any luck with the sink?" she asked, but her attention was already elsewhere, fingers typing rapidly on her phone. "Getting there," I said, studying her face. Emily had always been beautiful in a sharp, professional way. Angular cheekbones, dark hair pulled back in a style that said she meant business, green eyes that could dissect a legal argument or a person's weaknesses with equal precision. Tonight, though, there was something different. A flush to her cheeks, a brightness in her eyes that I recognized but hadn't seen directed at me in years. She was glowing. That's what they called it in romance novels, wasn't it? The glow of a woman in love. Just not with her husband. "I'm heading up to bed," she announced, not looking up from her phone. "Early morning tomorrow. The Henderson case is going to trial, and Rich wants me to handle the opening arguments." Rich wants. Everything lately was about what Rich wanted, what Rich thought, what Rich suggested. I'd been too distracted by the inheritance, the sudden weight of managing my grandfather's estate, to pay attention to how often that name came up in our conversations. "That's great, Em. You've worked hard for this opportunity." She paused at the doorway, glancing back with something that might have been guilt or pity. "You know, I appreciate you being supportive, Nathan. Not every husband would be so understanding about the long hours." Understanding, right. I watched her disappear upstairs, listened to her footsteps cross the bedroom floor, heard the shower start running. The same routine as always, but now every familiar sound felt like evidence of something I'd been too blind to see. I finished with the sink, packed up my tools, and wandered into the living room. Emily's laptop was still open on the coffee table, screensaver dancing across the display. Her phone charger was plugged in next to the couch, and there, wedged between the cushions, something glinted in the lamplight. A bracelet. Silver, expensive looking, with initials engraved on a small charm. R.K. Rich Keller. I held it up to the light, turning it over in my palm. Emily didn't wear jewelry like this. Her style was more minimalist, professional. This was the kind of gift a man gave to a woman he was trying to impress, trying to claim. The shower was still running upstairs. I slipped the bracelet into my pocket and walked to the front windows, looking out at Haverford's quiet streets. The town looked different at night, older somehow, like you could see through the modern facades to the mill town underneath. Empty factories and abandoned dreams, dressed up with antique streetlights and historical society plaques. My grandfather had owned half this town once, back when the mills were running and people had work. Now it was all coffee shops and boutiques trying to attract tourists who mostly drove through on their way to somewhere more interesting. The inheritance had made me wealthy on paper, but it felt like being rich in a currency nobody wanted anymore. Emily's voice echoed in my memory. Nathan won't know what hit him. Well, she was wrong about that. I knew exactly what was hitting me. The question was what I planned to do about it. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Jules Martinez, my old friend who ran the boxing gym downtown. If anyone would be awake at this hour, it would be Jules, probably watching fight videos and planning training sessions for his handful of dedicated students. Nathan? Jules answered on the second ring. Everything okay, man? It's past midnight. Can't sleep? I said. Mind if I come by the gym? Need to hit something. Jules chuckled. Trouble in paradise? I'll put the coffee on. 20 minutes later, I was standing in the doorway of Martini's boxing, breathing in the familiar smell of sweat, leather, and industrial disinfectant. The gym occupied the ground floor of an old textile building, all exposed brick and high ceilings, with a ring in the center surrounded by heavy bags and training equipment that had seen better decades. Jules was waiting with 2 cups of coffee and the knowing look of a man who'd seen his share of personal disasters. At 40, he was still in fighting shape, compact and quick, with graying hair and hands that told stories of too many amateur bouts in his youth. So, he said, handing me a cup, what's eating you? I told him everything. The phone call, the bracelet, the months of late nights and weekend meetings that suddenly made sense in the worst possible way. Jules listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. You know what you have to do, he said finally. Divorce lawyer? Eventually, maybe. But first, you need to decide who you want to be in this story. Jules gestured around the gym, at the faded posters of local fighters and the trophy case filled with small victories. You can be the victim, the guy who got played and walked away with his tail between his legs, or you can be something else. What else? The guy who plays back. The guy who doesn't just get even, but gets ahead. Jules grinned, and there was something dangerous in his expression. Your wife thinks you're some kind of pushover, right? The quiet IT guy who inherited some money and doesn't know what to do with it? I nodded. Show her different. Show them both different. You've got advantages they don't know about. Use them. I thought about that as I drove home through Haverford's empty streets. The mansion was dark when I pulled into the driveway, Emily's car parked in its usual spot. Inside, the house was quiet, except for the familiar sounds of old wood settling and pipes cooling down. But something had changed. Maybe it was just my perspective. But the mansion felt less like a burden and more like a fortress. A place where I could plan, where I could think, where I could decide exactly how this story was going to end. Emily was asleep when I slipped into the bedroom, her phone charging on the nightstand, her breathing deep and regular. She looked peaceful, innocent even, curled up under the expensive sheets we'd bought to match the house's grandeur. I stood there for a moment, watching her sleep, the bracelet heavy in my pocket. Tomorrow, I would start gathering evidence. Tomorrow, I would begin to understand exactly what kind of timeline Emily and Rich were working with. But tonight, I let myself feel the full weight of the betrayal, let it settle into my bones like winter cold. Because Jules was right about one thing. I needed to decide who I was going to be in this story. And I was pretty sure Emily wasn't going to like my choice. I started following them 3 days later. Not like some obsessed stalker in a thriller movie, but methodically, professionally, the way I'd approach any IT problem that needed solving. Data collection first, analysis second, action third. Emily and Rich had been careful, but that they hadn't been careful enough to fool someone who understood systems and patterns. The first thing I learned was that their lunch meetings weren't happening at restaurants. I'd parked across from Morrison, Keller and Associates at 12:30 on a Wednesday, expecting to see them leave together for some downtown bistro. Instead, Emily walked out alone, got in her car, and drove 15 minutes to Riverside Commons, one of those upscale apartment complexes that had sprouted around Haverford's gentrification efforts. Rich's BMW was already in the parking lot. I sat in my truck for an hour, watching the windows of Unit 3B, feeling like the world's most pathetic private investigator. But when Emily emerged at 2:15, hair slightly mussed and looking satisfied in a way that made my stomach turn, I had my confirmation. They weren't just having an affair. They had a place. The second thing I learned was that Tasha Williams, Emily's best friend and paralegal at the firm, knew everything. I'd always thought Tasha was harmless, one of those perpetually single women who lived vicariously through other people's relationships. She was pleasant enough at office parties, always asking about my work with that polite interest people show when they're trying to be nice but don't really care. Medium height, brown hair, forgettable in the way that made her perfect for gathering information without being noticed. But when I saw her leaving the apartment complex 20 minutes after Emily, I realized I'd underestimated her completely. Tasha wasn't just Emily's confidant. She was the logistics coordinator, the one making sure schedules aligned and alibis held up, probably the one who'd found the apartment, maybe even the one paying for it through some shell arrangement that wouldn't show up on Rich's credit cards. The third thing I learned was that I was good at this. Maybe it was all those years fixing computer networks, learning to trace problems through complex systems, but surveillance felt natural. I varied my vehicles, borrowing Jules's old Camaro one day, renting a nondescript sedan the next. I mapped their patterns, documented their routines, built a comprehensive picture of their operation. Because that's what it was, an operation. This wasn't some passionate affair that had gotten out of hand. This was planned, coordinated, and designed to achieve specific goals. I just needed to figure out what those goals were. The answer came on a Friday afternoon when I followed Tasha to a coffee shop downtown and positioned myself at a corner table with a clear view of her booth. She was meeting with someone I didn't recognize, a thin man in an expensive suit with the predatory look of a lawyer who specialized in ugly cases. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could see Tasha sliding a manila folder across the table. The man examined the contents, nodded approvingly, and handed her a business card. When they shook hands, it had the finality of a deal being closed. After they left, I approached the barista, a college-age kid with multiple piercings who looked bored enough to be helpful. "That guy in the suit," I said, sliding a 20 across the counter. "He comes in here often?" The kid pocketed the bill smoothly. "Divorce lawyer. Real shark, from what I hear. Specializes in high-net-worth cases where people want to play dirty." My hands were steady as I walked back to my truck, but inside, everything was crystallizing into sharp, painful focus. Emily wasn't just cheating on me. She was building a case against me, gathering evidence for a divorce that would leave her with as much of my inheritance as possible. That night, I sat in my grandfather's old study, surrounded by boxes of papers I'd been meaning to sort through for months. The room smelled like pipe tobacco and old leather, reminders of a man I'd barely known, but whose money had changed my life completely. I'd been estranged from my grandfather for most of my adult life, the result of some family drama I'd never fully understood. When his lawyer called to tell me I'd inherited everything, I'd assumed it was because there was nobody else left. The old man had outlived his friends, alienated his neighbors, and spent his final years as Haverford's resident eccentric millionaire. Now, going through his papers with new purpose, I began to see a different picture. My grandfather hadn't been a recluse. He'd been a strategist. The files were meticulously organized, financial records, property deeds, legal documents, and correspondence that painted a portrait of a man who understood exactly how power worked in a small town. He'd owned pieces of half the businesses in Haverford, held mortgages on prime real estate, and maintained detailed files on every prominent family's secrets and vulnerabilities, including the Kellers. Rich's file was particularly interesting. My grandfather had documented Rich's gambling problem going back 15 years, complete with records of debts to some very unpleasant people and evidence of money being skimmed from client accounts to cover losses. There were photographs, bank records, and what looked like surveillance reports from a private investigator. But the most interesting document was a letter dated just 6 months before my grandfather's passing. "Nathan, if you're reading this, then the old bastard is finally gone and you've inherited his mess. Don't feel guilty about our estrangement. It was necessary to protect you from the kind of enemies a man accumulates when he refuses to play by other people's rules. You'll find that money makes people stupid and predictable. They'll assume you're weak because you're new to wealth, that you don't understand how the game is played. Let them think that. It's the best advantage you'll ever have. The Keller boy has been sniffing around your wife since she started working at his firm. I've been documenting his activities in case you need leverage later. You'll find everything in the safe behind the bookshelf. The combination is your mother's birthday. Trust no one completely, but remember that everyone has a price, even the people who claim to love you. Make me proud. Your grandfather." I stared at the letter for a long time, reading it twice to make sure I understood. My grandfather had known. He'd seen this coming months ago and had been preparing for it, gathering ammunition for a war he knew I'd have to fight. The safe was exactly where he'd said it would be, hidden behind a false panel in the built-in bookshelf. Inside, I found more files, more photographs, and something that made my pulse quicken: video recordings. My grandfather had been thorough. Security cameras positioned around town, recording devices in strategic locations, a network of information gathering that would have impressed any intelligence agency. The videos showed Rich and Emily together, but they also showed something else. Tasha meeting with the divorce lawyer multiple times over the past month, Emily signing documents at the apartment, Rich making phone calls that looked urgent and desperate. They weren't just planning to divorce me, they were planning to destroy me. The timeline Emily had mentioned on the phone was becoming clear. First, they'd establish grounds for divorce, probably claiming I was mentally unstable or financially irresponsible. Then, they'd fight for control of the inheritance, using my grandfather's reputation as a town pariah to argue that I was unfit to manage his estate. Rich would position himself as Emily's protector and advisor, eventually taking control of assets worth millions. It was actually a pretty good plan. Too bad for them that my grandfather had been better at this game than all of them combined. I spent the rest of the weekend going through everything, building my own files, understanding the scope of what I was dealing with. By Sunday night, I had a complete picture of their operation and something else, a plan of my own. Jules was right. I needed to decide who I was going to be in this story. I'd been the underdog for too long, the quiet IT guy who fixed other people's problems and stayed in the background. But that man had advantages Emily and Rich couldn't see: patience, technical skills, and now, thanks to my grandfather, information that could destroy them both. Monday morning, I made my first move. I called Emily at work, using the cheerful, oblivious tone of a husband who suspected nothing. "Hey, honey, I was thinking we should celebrate this weekend. Maybe invite some people over, show off the house a little. What do you think?" There was a pause, and I could practically hear her calculating risks and opportunities. "That sounds nice, Nathan. Who are you thinking of inviting?" "Oh, some people from town, maybe your colleagues from the firm. Rich seems like a nice guy, and I'd love to get to know him better." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll check his schedule," she said carefully. "Great. I'll start planning something special. This house has been in the family for generations. Time to make some new memories." After I hung up, I sat back in my grandfather's chair and smiled. Emily thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She was about to learn that I'd been studying the board a lot longer than she realized. The party was set for Saturday night, but I made my real move on Thursday. I'd spent 2 days setting up what I called Operation Transparency, a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to introduce Haverford to the real Rich Keller. My grandfather's files had given me the ammunition, my IT background gave me the delivery system. The first salvo was elegant in its simplicity, an anonymous email to the Haverford Gazette's gossip columnist, complete with photographs of Rich's BMW parked outside a gambling den 2 towns over. The pictures were time-stamped during business hours, when he should have been at the law firm managing client accounts. The second wave hit Rich's professional reputation. I created a series of fake social media accounts and began posting reviews of Morrison, Keller, and Associates, each one mentioning specific details about Rich's behavior that could only have come from inside knowledge. Nothing libelous, just enough truth to make people uncomfortable. Managing partner seems more interested in managing his bets than his cases. Overheard Mr. Keller on the phone discussing payment arrangements that sounded more like loan shark negotiations than legal business. Beautiful office. Shame about the ethical standards. By Wednesday evening, the posts had been shared dozens of times. By Thursday morning, Rich was getting calls from concerned clients. But the masterstroke was the video. I'd spent Tuesday night at the apartment complex using equipment I'd borrowed from a security company that owed me a favor. The camera was small, nearly invisible, positioned to capture everyone entering and leaving Unit 3B. When Rich and Emily arrived for their usual Thursday afternoon session, I was ready. The footage was perfect. Rich's distinctive BMW pulling into the lot, Emily arriving 10 minutes later, both of them entering the apartment with the easy familiarity of an established routine. Nothing explicit, nothing that crossed legal lines, but damning in its implications. I uploaded the video to an anonymous file-sharing site and sent the link to 3 people: Rich's wife, the senior partners at his law firm, and Shay Morrison, the bartender at Murphy's Pub, who knew everyone in town and had never met a piece of gossip she couldn't improve. Then I sat back and waited for the explosion. It came faster than I'd expected. Rich's wife, Patricia, was apparently not the kind of woman who suffered betrayal quietly. By Thursday afternoon, she was at the law firm, demanding to see her husband and making enough noise that half of downtown could hear her. The senior partners, already nervous about the social media rumors, were suddenly very interested in Rich's recent activities. Emily called me at 3:30, her voice tight with panic. "Nathan, I need to come home early today. There's some drama at the office, and Rich thinks it would be better if I wasn't around while they sort it out." "What kind of drama?" I asked, injecting just the right note of concern. "Someone's been spreading rumors about Rich online, probably a disgruntled client or something, but it's causing problems with his wife. You know how these things go." I did indeed know how these things went. Emily arrived home at 4:15, clearly shaken but trying to hide it. She went straight to her laptop, probably to check the damage online, while I pretended to be absorbed in planning Saturday's party. "Everything okay?" I asked, looking up from my notepad with innocent concern. "Fine," she said quickly. "Just work stress. Rich is dealing with some personal issues that are affecting the office." Personal issues. That was one way to describe having your affair exposed to your wife and business partners. "Maybe we should postpone the party," I suggested. "If Rich is having problems, he might not be in a social mood." "No!" Emily's response was sharp enough to cut. She caught herself immediately, softening her tone. "I mean, no, let's go ahead with it. Rich could probably use the distraction. And Tasha's really looking forward to seeing the house." Tasha. I'd been wondering when she'd surface in all this. "Great," I said. "I'll make sure we have plenty of food and drinks. Should be a memorable evening." That night, I drove to Murphy's pub to check the local temperature. The bar was Haverford's unofficial information exchange, the place where rumors were born and reputations were buried. If my campaign was working, Shay would have heard about it. Murphy's occupied the ground floor of a brick building that had been serving drinks to mill workers since the 1920s. The interior was all dark wood and dim lighting, with a long bar that had absorbed decades of secrets and a clientele that treated gossip like a competitive sport. Shay was behind the bar, polishing glasses with the focused attention of someone who'd been thinking hard about something interesting. She was in her 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing important in a town where very little happened. "Nathan?" she called out when she saw me. "Perfect timing. I was just thinking about you." I ordered a beer and settled onto a bar stool, trying to look casual. "Yeah? What about?" "Well, you know how people talk in a place like this. And lately there's been some interesting conversation about your wife's boss." "Rich Keller?" "That's the one." Shay leaned closer, lowering her voice to the conspiratorial whisper that meant prime gossip was about to be shared. "Seems like Mr. Golden Boy might not be so golden after all. Word is his wife caught him stepping out, and the senior partners at his firm are asking some uncomfortable questions about his client management." "No kidding," I said, taking a sip of beer. "That's rough." "Gets better. Or worse, depending on your perspective. Turns out he's got gambling debts all over the county, and some of the people he owes aren't the patient type. Patricia Keller's talking to divorce lawyers, and there's rumors she's going to take him for everything he's worth." I shook my head sympathetically. Small towns, right? Everyone knows everyone else's business. Especially when someone makes sure the right people see the right information at the right time. Shay's eyes were bright with curiosity. "Funny thing is, nobody knows who started sharing all this dirt. Could be anyone with a grudge, or maybe just someone who thinks the town deserves to know what kind of man they've been trusting with their legal problems." "Could be," I agreed. I finished my beer and left a generous tip, feeling satisfied with the evening's intelligence gathering. My campaign was working better than I'd hoped. Rich's reputation was in free fall, his marriage was imploding, and his business partners were starting to distance themselves from the scandal. But I wasn't done yet. Saturday's party would be the finale, the moment when all of Haverford's gossip networks converged in my living room to witness the final act of Rich Keller's social destruction. Friday morning brought an unexpected complication. Tasha called me directly. "Nathan, it's Tasha Williams from Emily's office. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted to talk to you about tomorrow night." I'd been expecting this. Tasha was too smart not to realize that someone was orchestrating Rich's downfall, and she was probably starting to suspect that the timing wasn't coincidental. "Of course, Tasha. What's on your mind?" "Well, with everything that's happening with Rich right now, Emily's pretty stressed. I was wondering if you might consider keeping the party small, maybe just close friends. You know how people talk in this town." "I understand your concern," I said carefully. "But I think Emily could use the distraction. And honestly, Rich might benefit from being around people who support him, show the town that his friends still believe in him." There was a pause, and I could practically hear Tasha's mind working. "That's very thoughtful of you, Nathan. Emily's lucky to have such a supportive husband." I try to be understanding. Marriage is about standing by each other when things get difficult, don't you think? Absolutely, Tasha said, but there was something in her voice that suggested she was hearing more than my words. I'll see you tomorrow night. After she hung up, I sat back and considered the conversation. Tasha was definitely suspicious, but she was also trapped. If she pushed too hard to cancel the party, it would look like she was trying to protect Rich from something. If she let it proceed, she'd be walking into whatever I had planned. Either way, I was controlling the game now. Saturday afternoon, I spent hours preparing the house for what would probably be the most important party of my life. I arranged the furniture to create natural conversation areas, set up a bar in the living room, and made sure every light in the mansion was working perfectly. I wanted the house to look impressive, successful, like the home of a man who belonged in Haverford's upper circles. Most importantly, I set up recording equipment in key locations. If tonight went according to plan, I'd need documentation of everything that happened. At 7 p.m., the guests started arriving. The first to show up were some neighbors and local business owners, people who'd known my grandfather and were curious about his heir. They wandered through the mansion with the careful appreciation of people trying to decide if I was worthy of the inheritance or just a lucky beneficiary. Emily appeared at 7:30, looking stunning in a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She'd spent extra time on her appearance tonight, and I realized she was trying to project confidence, to show the town that she wasn't affected by the rumors swirling around her workplace. "The house looks wonderful, Nathan," she said, kissing my cheek with the performance of affection. "You've really outdone yourself." "Thanks. I wanted everything to be perfect tonight." Rich arrived at 8 p.m., and I had to admire his courage. The man was walking into a room full of people who'd spent the week discussing his personal scandals, but he entered with his head high and his professional smile firmly in place. He looked older than he had a week ago, with lines around his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. But he worked the room like the politician he'd always been, shaking hands and making small talk as if nothing had changed. Tasha was the last to arrive at 8:15, and she surveyed the room with the calculating gaze of someone trying to assess threats and opportunities. When she saw me watching her, she smiled and headed in my direction. "Nathan, this is incredible," she said, gesturing around the living room. "Emily told me the house was impressive, but this is like something out of a magazine." "Thank you. My grandfather had excellent taste." "He certainly did, and he was smart to leave it all to you. Emily says you're handling the inheritance beautifully." There was something in her tone that made me think she was fishing for information, trying to understand how much I knew about their plans for my money. "I'm learning," I said. "Turns out there's a lot more to managing wealth than I expected. Good thing I have Emily to help me navigate the legal complexities." Tasha's smile flickered slightly. "Yes, Emily's very good at complex legal situations. She has excellent instincts about people's motivations." "I'm sure she does." By 8:30, the party was in full swing. Conversations flowed around the room like currents in a river, carrying information and speculation from group to group. I moved through the crowd, playing the role of gracious host while keeping track of who was talking to whom and what topics were generating the most interest. Rich was holding up well, considering the circumstances. He'd positioned himself near the bar and was telling stories about recent legal victories, probably trying to remind people of his professional competence. Emily stayed close to him, not obviously so, but near enough to provide support if the conversation turned uncomfortable. That's when I decided it was time for the evening's main event. I tapped a knife against my wine glass, calling for attention. The room gradually quieted, faces turning toward me with polite expectation. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," I began. "This house has been in my family for generations, but it's never felt more like home than it does right now, surrounded by friends and neighbors." There were murmurs of appreciation, the kind of response people give to gracious hosts. My grandfather was a private man, and I know some people in town found him difficult to understand, but going through his papers these past few months, I've learned that he cared deeply about Haverford and the people who live here. He kept detailed records of our community's history, including some fascinating stories about local families and businesses. I paused, letting that sink in. Several people shifted uncomfortably, probably wondering what kind of stories my grandfather had been collecting. For instance, did you know that the Morrison, Keller, and Associates law firm has been serving our community for over 30 years? That's 3 decades of helping families through difficult times, managing estates, handling the legal complexities that make small-town life possible. Rich straightened slightly, probably relieved that I seemed to be heading toward a compliment. Of course, any organization that's been around that long accumulates its share of interesting stories. My grandfather documented quite a few of them. The room was completely quiet now. everyone sensing that something significant was about to happen. But tonight isn't about the past. It's about the future, about the relationships that will shape our community going forward. I raised my glass to friendship, loyalty, and the courage to face the truth, whatever it might be. The toast was echoed around the room, but I noticed that Rich barely touched his glass to his lips, and Emily's smile looked strained. As conversations resumed, I made my way over to where Rich was standing with a small group of local business owners. "Rich, I'm so glad you could make it tonight," I said, extending my hand. "Emily speaks about you constantly. She has such respect for your leadership at the firm." "That's kind of her to say," Rich replied, his handshake firm despite the wariness in his eyes. "I've been thinking we should get to know each other better. After all, you're such an important part of Emily's professional life. Maybe we could have lunch sometime, just the two of us. I'd love to hear your thoughts on managing complex financial situations." Rich's face went pale. The offer sounded innocent enough to the casual listener, but he understood the subtext. I knew about the apartment, the gambling debts, the plans for my inheritance. "That sounds great, Nathan. I'll check my schedule." "Wonderful. I'll call your office Monday to set something up." I moved away before he could respond, leaving him to wonder exactly how much I knew and what I planned to do with the information. The party continued for another hour, but the energy had shifted. People seemed more aware of undercurrents, more careful about their conversations. Rich left early, claiming he had an urgent case to review. Emily stayed until the end, playing the role of supportive wife, but I could see the questions in her eyes. After the last guest departed and we'd finished cleaning up, Emily and I stood in the kitchen, the silence heavy between us. "That was a lovely party, Nathan," she said finally. "Everyone seemed to have a good time." "I think so too. Rich looked a little tired, though. I hope he's not letting work stress get to him." Emily studied my face, trying to read my expression. "He's been dealing with some personal issues lately. Nothing serious, just the kind of problems everyone faces. Of course, we all have our challenges." I kissed her goodnight and headed upstairs, leaving her standing in the kitchen with her thoughts. As I got ready for bed, I could hear her moving around downstairs, probably making phone calls or sending text messages. Let her worry. Let them both worry. Because Monday morning, I was going to start the final phase of my plan, and by the time I was finished, Rich Keller would understand exactly what happened when someone tried to steal from a man whose grandfather had taught him how to fight back. The game was just getting started. Monday morning brought the call I'd been expecting. "Nathan, we need to talk." Emily's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Can you meet me at the office this afternoon?" "Of course. Is everything okay?" "We'll discuss it when you get here. 2:00. She hung up before I could respond, which told me everything I needed to know. They'd spent the weekend analyzing Saturday night's party, trying to figure out how much I knew and what my next move might be. Now they were ready to accelerate their timeline. Perfect. I spent the morning making my own preparations. First, I visited my grandfather's old lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Chen, who'd been managing the estate's legal affairs for decades. I needed to understand exactly what protections my inheritance had and what vulnerabilities Emily might try to exploit. "Your grandfather was very thorough," Margaret explained, spreading documents across her conference table. "The trust structure he established makes it nearly impossible for anyone to challenge your control of the assets, even a spouse in divorce proceedings." "What about claims of mental incompetence or financial irresponsibility?" Margaret's smile was predatory. "He anticipated that too. There are specific provisions requiring multiple medical evaluations and court hearings, with a very high burden of proof. Someone would need substantial evidence of genuine incapacity, not just poor judgment or unusual behavior. And if someone tried to manufacture that evidence, then they'd be committing fraud, which carries serious legal consequences." Margaret leaned forward. "Nathan, is there something specific you're concerned about?" I told her about Emily's affair and the divorce lawyer Tasha had been meeting with. Margaret listened with the focused attention of someone who'd seen every variation of human greed and betrayal. "They're probably planning to claim the inheritance has made you unstable," she said when I finished. "Changed your personality, affected your judgment, made you paranoid or reckless. If they could establish that pattern, they might argue for temporary conservatorship while the divorce proceedings play out." "Can they do that?" "Not easily, but it's possible if they have the right evidence and the right judge. The key would be documenting behavior that seems irrational or self-destructive. Like throwing a party to humiliate your wife's lover in front of the entire town, I thought. Like making veiled threats and playing psychological games with people who had the power to hurt you. They were trying to bait me into acting crazy so they could use my behavior against me. Too bad for them that I'd learned to think 3 moves ahead." At 2 p.m. sharp, I walked into Morrison, Keller & Associates' downtown offices. The reception area was all polished wood and expensive artwork, designed to project competence and success. The receptionist, a young woman who probably knew every secret in the building, directed me to conference room B. Emily was waiting with Rich and Tasha, all of them arranged on one side of the table like a tribunal. The setup was clearly intended to intimidate, to make me feel outnumbered and defensive. Instead, I smiled and took the chair directly across from Rich. "Thanks for meeting with me on short notice," Emily began, her lawyer voice in full effect. "We wanted to discuss some concerns that have come up regarding your recent behavior." "What kind of concerns?" Rich leaned forward, trying to project authority despite the fact that his reputation was currently circling the drain. "Nathan, we're all friends here, so I'm going to be direct. Your conduct at the party Saturday night made several people uncomfortable. The veiled references to your grandfather's files, the implications about local families and businesses, it seemed designed to create anxiety and suspicion. I was sharing family history. I thought people would find it interesting." "It came across as threatening," Tasha interjected, "like you were suggesting you had damaging information about people and might use it inappropriately." I looked at each of them in turn, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Are you worried I might have damaging information about someone in particular?" Emily's professional mask slipped slightly. "Nathan, we're concerned about you. The inheritance has been a huge change, and change can be stressful. Sometimes stress makes people act in ways that aren't in their best interests." "What kind of ways?" "Paranoid behavior, seeing conspiracies where none exist, making accusations based on incomplete information." Rich's voice was steady, but there was sweat on his forehead. "These are classic symptoms of someone who's struggling to cope with sudden wealth and responsibility." I almost laughed. They were actually trying to gaslight me, to convince me that my accurate assessment of their betrayal was a sign of mental instability. "That's interesting," I said. "What would you suggest I do about these symptoms?" Emily reached across the table and took my hand, her touch warm and seemingly sincere. "We think you should consider talking to someone, a therapist who specializes in adjustment disorders, just temporarily, until you feel more settled." "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime, it might be wise to avoid making any major financial decisions or taking actions that could damage relationships in the community." Rich's tone was carefully neutral, but his meaning was clear. Stop investigating us, stop threatening us, or face the consequences. I squeezed Emily's hand gently, then released it. "You know what? You're absolutely right. I have been feeling stressed lately, and I think I know exactly what's causing it." All three of them relaxed slightly, probably thinking they'd successfully manipulated me into compliance. "The problem is trust," I continued. "I've been having trouble trusting the people closest to me, wondering if they have my best interests at heart or if they might be pursuing their own agendas." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "For instance," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket, "I found this bracelet in our living room couch last week." I placed Rich's gift to Emily on the conference table. "Emily, I don't remember you wearing anything like this. Do you know where it came from?" Emily stared at the bracelet like it was a coiled snake. Someone must have dropped it at the party." "Funny thing is, I found it before the party. And those initials, RK, they match someone in this room." Rich's face had gone completely white. "Nathan, I can explain. I'm sure you can. Just like you could probably explain why your BMW has been parked at Riverside Commons every Thursday afternoon for the past month, or why Emily's been receiving text messages from your number at all hours of the day and night." Tasha started to stand up. "I think this meeting is over." "Sit down, Tasha." My voice was quiet, but something in it made her freeze. "We haven't gotten to your part yet." I pulled out my phone and opened a photo gallery, then slid it across the table. The images showed Tasha meeting with the divorce lawyer, Emily signing documents at the apartment, Rich making what looked like desperate phone calls. "You've all been very busy," I said, "planning my divorce, building a case for mental incompetence, probably figuring out how to get control of my grandfather's estate. The only thing I can't figure out is whether this was always the plan, or if you just got greedy after the inheritance came through." Emily found her voice first. "Nathan, this isn't what it looks like." "Really? Then explain what it is." She glanced at Rich, then at Tasha, clearly hoping one of them would provide a plausible explanation. When none came, she tried a different approach. "Okay, yes, Rich and I have developed feelings for each other, but that doesn't mean we're trying to hurt you financially. The legal consultation was just to understand our options, to figure out how to handle this situation fairly." "Fairly." I repeated the word like it tasted bitter. Is that what you call secretly recording my conversations, documenting my behavior, and building a case to have me declared mentally incompetent? Rich finally found his courage. We're concerned about your judgment, Nathan. The paranoid behavior, the threats at the party, this surveillance of our private lives. It's not normal. Maybe you do need professional help. I stood up slowly, letting them see the full extent of my calm confidence. You want to know what's not normal? A managing partner who embezzles client funds to pay gambling debts, a lawyer who commits adultery in an apartment paid for with stolen money, a paralegal who coordinates evidence tampering and witness intimidation. Tasha's face went ashen. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can. My grandfather kept very detailed records, and I've been adding to them. Financial records, photographs, video recordings, witness statements, enough evidence to destroy all 3 of your careers and send at least 2 of you to prison. The silence that followed was deafening. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. Emily, you're going to go home, pack your things, and move out of my house. And tonight. You can stay wherever you want, but it won't be under my roof. Nathan. Rich, you're going to resign from the law firm and check yourself into gambling addiction treatment. If you're very lucky and very quiet, I might not share my grandfather's files with the State Bar Association. You can't. And Tasha, you're going to disappear. Find a new job in a different town, because if I see you anywhere near my wife or my business again, I'll make sure everyone in New England knows exactly what kind of person you really are. I walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at them. Oh, and one more thing. The apartment lease at Riverside Commons? It's in my name now. I bought the building this morning. Consider it my contribution to your relationship. You have until Friday to find somewhere else to conduct your business. I left them sitting in stunned silence, their carefully constructed plan crumbling around them like a house of cards in a hurricane. Outside, the afternoon air felt crisp and clean, full of possibilities. I'd spent months feeling like a victim, like someone things happened to rather than someone who made things happen. That version of Nathan was gone forever. Now came the really fun part. Watching them try to salvage something from the wreckage of their ambitions, knowing that every move they made would only make things worse for them. My grandfather had been right about one thing. Money didn't just make people stupid and predictable, it made them desperate. And desperate people made the most entertaining mistakes of all. Emily came home at 6 p.m. with red eyes and a suitcase, moving through our bedroom like a ghost. I watched from the doorway as she packed her clothes, her movements mechanical and defeated. Where will you go? I asked, not because I cared, but because the conversation felt necessary. Tasha's apartment, for now. Her voice was hollow. Nathan, I want you to know that I never meant for things to happen this way. Which things? The affair or getting caught? She flinched. I loved you. I still love you in a way. But when you inherited all that money, everything changed. You changed. I got stronger. That's not the same thing as changing. Emily zipped up her suitcase and turned to face me. What you did today, destroying Rich's career, threatening Tasha, that's not strength. That's revenge. You're right, I said. It is revenge, and I'm not finished yet. She left without another word, taking only what she could carry and leaving behind the life we'd built together. I stood at the front window and watched her car disappear down the street, feeling nothing but a cold satisfaction. The house felt different with her gone, cleaner somehow, like an infection had been lanced and was finally beginning to heal. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jules. Heard there was some excitement at the law firm today. Everything okay? I smiled and typed back. Never better. Drinks tomorrow night? Wouldn't miss it. Wednesday morning brought the first wave of consequences. Rich's resignation from Morrison, Keller, and Associates was announced in a terse press release that cited personal reasons and a desire to pursue other opportunities. The senior partners were clearly trying to distance themselves from the scandal, but the damage to the firm's reputation was already spreading through Haverford's gossip networks. By afternoon, everyone knew that Rich Keller had been forced out of his own law firm amid rumors of gambling debts and embezzlement. His wife had filed for divorce and was demanding a forensic accounting of all their assets. The golden boy of Haverford's legal community had fallen from grace so completely that people were already forgetting why they'd ever respected him. Thursday brought news that Tasha had resigned from her paralegal position and left town, reportedly moving back to her hometown in Ohio. She'd cleaned out her apartment in the middle of the night, leaving no forwarding address and owing 2 months' rent. Emily, meanwhile, had found temporary work at a legal aid clinic across town, taking a massive pay cut and handling cases that were light years away from the corporate law she'd specialized in. The word around town was that no respectable firm would hire her, not after being associated with the Morrison-Keller scandal. Friday afternoon, I got a call from Margaret Chen. Nathan, I thought you should know that Emily's filed for divorce. She's representing herself, which suggests she couldn't find a lawyer willing to take the case. What's she asking for? Surprisingly little. Basic asset division, no alimony, no claims on the inheritance. It's like she just wants out as quickly and quietly as possible. That was smart of her. Emily had finally realized that fighting me would only make her situation worse, that her best option was to disappear and try to rebuild her life somewhere else. There is one interesting development, Margaret continued. She's requesting a restraining order, claiming you've been harassing and threatening her. On what grounds? The usual things: surveillance, intimidation, using your wealth and connections to damage her career prospects. The judge will probably dismiss it, but it suggests she's still looking for ways to paint you as the villain in this story. Let her try. I have documentation of everything I've done, and none of it crosses any legal lines. I know. But Nathan, be careful. Cornered animals sometimes do unpredictable things. That evening, I drove to Murphy's pub to take the town's temperature. The bar was packed with the usual crowd of locals, all of them eager to dissect the week's dramatic developments. Shay greeted me with a knowing smile. Well, well, the man of the hour. I have to say, Nathan, you've certainly livened things up around here. Just trying to keep life interesting. Mission accomplished. People are calling it the scandal of the decade. Rich Keller's fall from grace, Emily's affair, the mysterious evidence that brought it all down. It's like something out of a soap opera. I ordered a beer and found a spot at the bar where I could observe the room. Conversations swirled around me, fragments of speculation and rumor that painted a picture of a community trying to process what had happened. Never trusted that Keller boy, always thought he was too smooth. Emily seemed so professional, but you never really know people. Nathan's grandfather always said the family had steel in their spine. Heard Rich owes money to some very dangerous people. Wonder what other secrets are buried in those old files. I nursed my beer and listened, feeling like a playwright watching his drama unfold on stage. The story had taken on a life of its own now, growing and changing with each retelling, becoming part of Haverford's mythology. Around 9 p.m., the pub's door opened and Emily walked in. The conversations didn't exactly stop, but they shifted, became more muted and careful. Everyone knew who she was, knew what had happened, and they were curious to see how this confrontation would play out. Emily spotted me at the bar and walked over with the determined stride of someone who'd been rehearsing this moment. She looked tired, older than her 36 years, but there was still fire in her eyes. Nathan, I thought I might find you here. Emily, how are you settling in at the legal aid clinic? It's honest work, something you might not understand anymore. The insult was delivered quietly, but several people at nearby tables heard it. I could feel the attention of the room focusing on us, everyone waiting to see how I'd respond. I've always understood honest work, I said calmly. It's dishonest work I have trouble with. Affairs, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, those kinds of things. Emily's face flushed. You destroyed 3 people's lives because your pride was hurt. I defended myself against people who were trying to steal my inheritance and destroy my reputation. There's a difference. You had choices, Nathan. You could have confronted us privately, worked things out like adults. Instead, you chose to humiliate us publicly, to use your money and your grandfather's secrets like weapons. She was right, and we both knew it. I could have handled things differently, could have been more merciful, more forgiving. But mercy and forgiveness were luxuries I couldn't afford, not when the people closest to me had been planning my destruction. You made your choices too, Emily. You chose rich over me, chose money over loyalty, chose to betray the man who loved you. Now you're living with the consequences. And what about your consequences? Do you think this is over? That you can destroy people and walk away without any cost? Before I could answer, the pub's door opened again, and Rich Keller stumbled in. He looked awful. His typically neat hair was messy, his pricey suit wrinkled and stained, his eyes red and frantic. He scanned the room until he saw Emily and me at the bar, then staggered toward us. Nathan, he called out, his voice slurred with alcohol. Just the man I wanted to see. The entire pub went silent. This was better entertainment than anything they could have hoped for. Rich reached our table and swayed slightly, gripping the back of a chair for support. You think you're so smart, don't you? Think you won some kind of game? Rich, you're intoxicated, Emily said quietly. You should go home. Home? Rich laughed bitterly. What home? My wife kicked me out, my partners fired me, and the bank's foreclosing on my condo. Thanks to your husband's little revenge campaign, I've lost everything. You lost everything because you stole from your clients to pay gambling debts, I said. I just made sure people knew about it. You self-righteous bastard. Rich's voice was getting louder, more aggressive. You think inheriting your grandfather's dirty money makes you better than the rest of us? You think it gives you the right to play God with people's lives? I stood up slowly, aware that everyone in the pub was watching, that this confrontation would be discussed and analyzed for months to come. I think it gives me the right to protect myself from people who want to steal from me, and I think it gives me the resources to make sure justice gets served when the system fails. Rich took a step closer, his hands clenched into fists. For a moment, I thought he might actually take a swing at me, but then his shoulders sagged and the fight went out of him. You don't know what you've done, he said quietly. The people I owe money to, they don't care about bankruptcy or legal proceedings. They want their money, and if I can't pay them, they'll find other ways to collect. That sounds like a personal problem. It will be your problem too, eventually. Men like that don't forget, and they don't forgive. You made an enemy today, Nathan, a dangerous one. Rich turned and stumbled toward the door, leaving Emily and me alone with the weight of his words and the stares of everyone in the bar. Emily looked at me with something that might have been pity. Is this what winning feels like, Nathan? Are you happy now? I thought about the question seriously, examining my emotions like a scientist studying data. Was I happy? Not exactly. Satisfied? Definitely. Vindicated? Absolutely. I'm content, I said finally. For the first time in months, I know exactly where I stand and who I can trust. You can't trust anyone. That's the real cost of what you've done. You've made yourself into someone people fear instead of someone they love. Emily finished her drink and stood up. The restraining order hearing is Monday morning. I'll see you in court. After she left, I sat at the bar for another hour, thinking about what Rich had said about dangerous enemies and what Emily had said about the cost of revenge. They were both probably right, in their own ways. But as I drove home through Haverford's quiet streets, past the empty mills and the struggling downtown, past the houses where people were probably still talking about the night's drama, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete control over my own life. My grandfather had been right about power, about the way money changed everything, about the importance of being feared as well as respected. He'd also been right about the price of that power, the isolation that came with being someone who couldn't be touched or manipulated. It was a price I was willing to pay. The mansion was dark and quiet when I pulled into the driveway, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a fortress, a place where I could plan and think and decide what came next. Because Emily was wrong about one thing. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. I had wealth, information, and the will to use both. I had a town full of people who now understood that Nathan Morrison wasn't the quiet, harmless IT guy they'd thought he was. Most importantly, I had learned something valuable about myself. I was very good at being the villain. And in a world full of people who wanted to take what was mine, being the villain might be exactly what I needed to survive.